Welcome back to Simplifying the State. As always, I'm your host, Adam Watson. Before we begin our episode, if you would be so kind as to rate our podcast as well as to follow, that would really help us out. Additionally, this helps you stay up to date on what's happening in our government and our politics. Also, if you know anyone who may enjoy the show, be it a politics nerd like me, or just someone who wants to be more informed, please share the show with them. Today, Howard Polskin, who specializes in analyzing right-wing media trends, stopped by to talk to us about a shift in media consumption, the effect of the Trump administration on more traditional media sources, and how the right-wing media ecosystem significantly differs from the left-wing media ecosystem. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for coming on. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your publication, The Writing?
Sure. First of all, my name's Howard Polskin. I started The Writing, and then that's RIGHTING in 2017 at the end of Donald Trump's first year of presidency, because I didn't understand how the country could have elected someone like Donald Trump. And then I started visiting all these right-wing websites, and that gave me my answer. So I decided to aggregate the headlines from about 15 right-wing websites every morning and send it out to all my subscribers. That's pretty much my origin story in a nutshell.
So how far to the right do you usually look when looking at these different news sources? Like, is it like New York Times, like center right to like Ben Shapiro, or like how far to the right would you say you usually look?
I usually draw the line at the Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi website. So that is so disturbing that I just will not, it's not good for my head to be there every day. But I will look at everything from the Gateway Pundit. Before it was shut down, I would go to InfoWars, Breitbart. On the other hand, I go to some right-wing websites that, you know, if you really weren't paying that close attention, you might even think that they're more mainstream. So I have it's pretty eclectic diet of what I'm looking on at the right. And the right-wing media, it isn't monolithic. It isn't all just one way of thinking. There are often many different opinions on the right.
What sort of differences do you see like between those different sources, and like what are some similarities? Because I know that often there's like an underlying similarity, like in the ideals they're trying to talk about. But is there like I'm assuming there's a difference in terms of like how extreme and the difference in rhetoric based on how far to the right you go.
I mean, most of them are basically supportive of what they have in common is the support of Donald Trump and MAGA. That's usually that's usually pretty big. And then it starts breaking down into what they attack. So for instance, there are some websites that come across as completely homophobic, and other right-wing websites, never go there. And it's you usually, you usually pick that up pretty quickly. Certainly during COVID, you saw some websites on the right that were pro-mask, pro getting the jab, and that there were other websites that were completely, appalled by anyone wearing a mask, that it was an affront to their freedom, and that they resented the government telling you, that you had to get a shot. That pissed off a lot of right-wing websites. That didn't go down so well.
I know that Candace Owens, she's becoming one of the most prominent podcasts and voices in this sort of right-wing mediascape. Do you think that she is reflective of the majority of these right-wing media sources, or do you think she's on like a very niche like subset of beliefs?
She's in a subset, no question about it. But she's made a business for herself. She's made a name for herself. She's getting eyeballs. People are paying attention to her. It's scary. Journalistically and morally, I think what she's doing is wrong, but she is the fastest growing right-wing podcast out there, according to my research.
In an opinion piece you wrote for Mediaite in January, you made some predictions about the directions right-wing media would go in 2026. A lot of them came true. They talked a lot about Minnesota comparatively to California. They're putting Mayor Mamdani in New York under a microscope. And they've also talked about rigged elections. And I think that was one of the most interesting predictions you had that came true, especially in California right now with the primaries they just had. You see a lot of right-wing media and now the president of the United States talking about potential fraud in those elections. So do you think that that is something that's going to continue to build until the midterms, or do you think that it's going to stay at the level it is now?
I've been following this very closely. I think this is going to be the big theme in the second half of the year from the right. It's led by President Trump, that the elections are rigged. And it's all because he anticipates, rightly so, that his platform is going to be not popular with voters. And therefore, he's already setting the stage for saying that the elections are rigged. And God knows what's going to happen after November 3rd and what he's going to do. And listen, he did that with his interview with Kristen Welker of NBC's Meet the Press on questions on rigged elections. He made a big show of it. And for the next few days, it's all that anyone on the right was writing about was rigged elections. That's exactly what he wants. I am not optimistic about where we're heading later this year.
I watched that interview and it's ended with him sort of getting up, storming out after Kristen Welker asked him to produce some of that evidence about voter fraud. Do you think that was intentional? Because I saw some people saying that that was a calculated piece of showmanship as opposed to he got upset and left.
I originally thought like he just completely lost his shit. And then 24 hours later, I was like, no, that was a calculated piece of political theater. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted the headlines. He wanted the drama, and he got his point across. And for 48 hours, he owned the news cycle on rigged elections. He was probably so happy about the outcome.
Do you see that sort of rigged election discussion in the Fox News, Newsmax sphere? Or do you see that more in Ben Shapiro, or is it sort of evenly spaced out?
I kind of feel it's more evenly spaced out. Not every person, not every pundit on the right or every right-wing outlet says that the elections are rigged, but it's certainly a common theme with many of them, and which is deeply, deeply disturbing because elections, free and fair elections, are a linchpin of democracy. And once you have the population doubting the integrity of elections, where does that leave us? Not in a good place.
I want to shift a little bit to media as a whole. You wrote a piece in January last year. You spoke about progressive audiences, yours included, were moving away not just from political news, but also more traditional news outlets, NBC, MSNBC, etc. Do you think that this is the case on both the left and the right, or do you think it's more so the left moving away from these more traditional sources of media and just sort of tuning out of politics in general, or do you think that's a commonality between both political spectrums?
Generally, in the media business, I think that legacy outlets, and I'm talking about outlets that have been in business for about at least 10 years, are seeing audience declines. And a lot of that has to do with the growth of new platforms, like podcasts. So when someone's listening to a podcast like this, they're not they may not be reading the New York Times online. They may not be watching NBC or Fox News or Newsmax. So there's so many more choices. And as I always like to say, for every fired or laid off journalist, a new Substack is born. And they have audiences and they're popular and they bring those audiences with them. And that leads to this decline. Furthermore, you also have AI. AI is also a factor. Why is that? Because when you search for a topic, you usually get a summation on the top of your search result from AI that does not take you back to the source material. It just sums it up, and you look at it, you get the information you want, and off you go without ever visiting the original outlet that produced that content or point of view. And that leads to audience erosion. So those are the factors. Now, is it happening more on the left and right? As far as I can tell, so far, it seems both the left and the right are suffering declines because of this. And it's definitely, I think, accelerating at the end of the first half of 2026. I just produced some new research that showed that all of the top 20 conservative websites, news websites on the right, lost audience in 2026, in the first half, in May of 26. And also the top mainstream news sites as well lost audience. CNN, Washington Post, the New York Times. So this is impacting both outlets on the left and the right, and I do not see it improving that much as the year progresses.
Sort of a follow up to that, I guess, would be, do you think that people moving away from these legacy and traditional media sources is going to lead to an increase in misinformation? You talked about that AI component of that, but with more independent journalists, it's more so of an honor code system to actually report facts. I mean, obviously, you can go and check, is this real? But but the vast majority of people, I think, do not. Well, I worry do not practice lateral reading and checking their sources and all that stuff. Do you think that's going to lead to a rise in misinformation?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's not we're not in a good place. I mean, let's put this way. I could if I have an idea for if I have an idea for an article, say, so I would go to like Columbia Journalism Review or msnow.com, and I would put together a pitch letter, and I'd say I want to do this, and we're going to focus on this, and I'd put about 6 or 7 points in there and send it off. Now, what I can do, I can take those same points, I can put it in an AI program and say, write me an 800-word article on this, and in 30 seconds, there it is. Now, I'm not going to do that, but that's the world where we're heading right now. And yes, a lot of news organizations are putting guardrails on that, and that's good. But not everyone's doing that. I just read this morning that there are these local newsletters across the country, and they're being entirely AI written. So no humans involved, and they're making money. So that's kind of that's a disturbing trend. And where's this going to lead us 2 or 3 years from now? This is a time in our nation's history where we need better reporting. We need skilled reporters out there. We don't need AI programs doing the work for us. We need reporters out in the field, asking the questions, meeting people, interviewing people.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big change, I think, in media because of those two factors, like you said, the AI component, and then also the shifting away from legacy media. I'm wondering, do you think that AI is eventually going to have to be adapted by these legacy media corporations in order to stay competitive with popular independent uh, media groups and individuals?
I mean, legacy outlets and any outlet that has guardrails on how AI is used is going to be under tremendous pressure, and the pressure is going to be financial, because there's a way you can run a newsroom more efficiently if AI programs do some of the writing, editing, but it might be shortcuts. So I am not part of any newsroom like that, but I can certainly see where the temptations lie. Like I said, I could probably have 5 to 8 articles written by AI a week for my newsletter, but I choose not to do it that way. I don't want to do it that way. And well, does that mean that I won't do it in the future? I hope not. But if I did, I would probably let the readers know that it was created by an AI program. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, Adam, I'm already using AI. I create images when I do my TikToks, because it's much when I think like, how can I illustrate this in something like that? And in 20 seconds, AI comes up with a great image that absolutely conveys what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So you think that eventually, like AI is going to become a necessary tool, but the scale to which it's going to be implemented isn't really clear yet because it's going to
Yes.
depend a lot on the regulation and the guardrails.
Yes. I mean, right now, Adam, we're in the first inning of AI. And it's even like think of kids who are 5 years old. I call them now Generation AI. Like they're going to be the first generation. They're going to be when someone who's five now, when they're in second or third grade, they're going to be using AI. So these are tremendous challenges, not just for journalists, not just for the political class, but throughout all of society, and it's certainly for the educational systems. And I worry a lot about the small kids right now. Like I said, I call them Generation AI.
Yeah, I mean, I know that my brothers are certainly much more involved in AI than I am right now. They like to play around with it and stuff like that. And I
How
know
old's
that
your brother?
my brothers they're both 14 right now.
Oh, and they're using AI. Wow.
Yeah. I mean,
Wow.
not in school. Our school district has been very hesitant to adopt AI. They have been also been pushing back a lot on people using AI, but I know that a lot of teachers and a lot of students still use it anyway, and so it sort of feels like rather than fighting against it, they should be figuring out ways
Amen.
to put guardrails on, but still allow to use it because it seems like this technology isn't going to go away anytime soon. So it seems like you should also be training people on how to use it responsibly at this age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I want to shift a little bit away from AI. So in the last 2 years, especially with the Skydance Paramount merger and then them acquiring Warner Brothers and CNN, it seems like more media is sort of being consolidated into the hands of a few. So you have that Skydance, CNN, Paramount, CBS, all them. And then you have the entire like Murdoch family owns those subsets. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. And then you have social media with Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. Do you worry about the consolidation of most of the mainstream media assets into the hands of maybe five people?
I've been in the media business my entire career. So this has always been an issue. And every decade there's a new worry and stuff like that. So part of it is like I'm somewhat dismissive of it. I think what's a little bit different this time, what has me concerned is the death of local newspapers, like major newspapers. Uh, where it used to be that you would have some very strong newspapers like in Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Boston, Miami, well regarded newspapers with bureaus not only in Washington, but in major capitals around the world. And that has basically gone away. Like some of these newspapers, they're just shadows of their former selves. So that's certainly a problem. So, when 15 years ago, if you were graduating journalism school, you'd have all these options. If you wanted to go into newspaper work or magazine work, you'd have many more possibilities. So it's not the consolidation per se, it's the closing of so many media brands that I haven't seen before. That's what's somewhat different. Uh, You could argue that, well, now journalists there's all these platforms where journalists can go and do their own thing. Substack, make money on TikTok, you name it, they can go YouTube. On the other hand, that's what Candace, back to Candace Owens, that's what she figured out because that's her business model. It's like the business of outrage. So I don't know what I think might happen maybe 5 to 7 years from now. All of these Substacks might be rolled up into certain brands. So, there's just all these, tiny places and they'll all be collected together and that'll, like a magazine. And I think that's where we might be heading. So while I think it's a legitimate concern at this point, I think we'll get through it.
Do you think that the closing of these papers and the shifting of their journalists to Substack, do you think that's just sort of the natural progression because we moved from newspaper to online? Do you think that those closing of those papers is just because people are watching more CNN and MSNBC and stuff?
Well, first of all, they're closing because of usually it's because of lack of advertising, and they're losing paid subscribers. I mean that's what's causing it. But then what's happening? If you're a laid off journalist and you start your own Substack, the game is to go to a paid mode. I mean, at the end of the day, the main way you're going to make your money is either advertising, which you're going to be up against Google and Facebook, which are sucking up most of the ad dollars out there, or you're going to have to go to a paid model. So it's a tough racket. And most of the writers who are making it as independent media outlets, they've come from mainstream or legacy outlets. So they're bringing those audiences with them. So to just start a media brand out of thin air is extremely difficult.
Do you think that I know that NBC and CBS and Fox have their affiliate stations in their various cities, and they put out some more local focused content. Do you think that they are able to offer at least a similar product to what these local papers were offering?
What's missing in a lot of areas are good local coverage, newspaper coverage. It is being filled to some extent by small nonprofit local newsrooms. I mean that is happening, and there are some success stories, but basically they have not replaced vibrant local newspapers. I mean that was back in the day, that was a very accepted professional path. If you wanted to be in the media business, go work in a local newspaper in New Providence, Rhode Island, or Denver, Colorado, or somewhere in the outskirts of Phoenix, something like that. Those avenues do not exist anymore. And so we're losing a lot of journalists or would-be journalists who know how to report and know about the political process and know something about government, and then they go on to bigger and better jobs. And that's the way it used to work. It's not working like that anymore.
Yeah. Recently, CBS, they've been sort of moving more to the right than they used to be. They used to be a pretty centrist-ish newspaper, but now it seems like they're receiving more and more influence from the right. There was this recent interview that was done with the New York Times with Scott Pelley, a former correspondent for 60 Minutes. Basically, he said that Barry Weiss sent an email to his boss about a segment they were doing on the Minnesota shootings, and they were saying to sort of influence it to make the protesters seem more violent and stuff like that. And then there are also the lawsuits with ABC and CBS, and so that's making them concerned about what they're putting on the air. And we saw that with the cancellation of Colbert. Are you concerned about the influence that the administration is having on these media groups?
Yes, I'm deeply concerned about it. No question about it. I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of an autocracy. One of the first things they go after is control the media. And that's what's happening with the Trump administration. Listen, this is not the first administration to try and control the press to some extent. I mean, all administrations do that. Everyone's got a bone to pick with the media. You go back to in the 60s, President Lyndon Johnson was furious with the press, with the coverage he was getting on the war in Vietnam. Even Barack Obama was being criticized for being heavy-handed with the press. But certainly we've seen nothing like the way the Trump administration has been putting, trying to put its boot on the neck of the press. And it's not just in the news coverage. We saw what happened with Colbert. We see what's happening with the lawsuits that the Trump administration is bringing against various media outlets. And like I said, it's deeply disturbing. And we need a healthy, vibrant, fearless press to stand up to the Trump administration. And I worry that not every one of our institutions is going to be able to do that.
I've seen a lot of talk about the right wing media ecosystem and how it's much larger and much robust than the more progressive media ecosystems. I've often heard the phrase, there needs to be a Joe Rogan of the left. I feel like the right wing media ecosystem has much more organic breakthrough than the left does, because I know that many people can name a lot of right wing media uh, personalities, and there are very few prominent left wing media personalities. I mean, Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, he's not as right as many of the others, but he's still, somewhat right leaning. I wonder, what do you think has allowed them to build up the media juggernaut that they have?
You know, Adam, I've thought about that a lot, and I haven't, over the last few years, I haven't come up with a really great answer for that. It's like, wow, they have all these personalities, stuff like that. It's not to say, first of all, when you think of the right, it's very clearly defined who is right wing or conservative, except for
Right.
Joe Rogan. So that's a good point. But on the left, it's like, so if someone's mainstream, so you have someone like Anderson Cooper. So do you say, is Anderson Cooper progressive? Is he liberal? No, I think he's mainstream. So you kind of start, chasing your tail trying to describe what makes someone left or progressive versus mainstream. Trump would say that anyone who's not pro MAGA is a raving liberal. But that's I'm certainly not in that camp. But I do think that the right has far more personalities, and partly it's because the business model is outrage. That's how you stand out. That's how you make money. That's how you draw audiences to you.
Do you think that's how the left should go about building up its media ecosystem? Because, I mean, in order to, win voters over in this new political environment, they need a robust way to deliver their message. That right wing media ecosystem has done wonders, for the right, because I think last election cycle, the Republicans did a lot better amongst young people and especially young men because of the fact that they had all these podcasts and they had all these, different media sources.
And Adam, I think that helps explain a little bit about the rise of Mondami. Very, very skilled politician, good with social media, good smile, a lot of vitality. So I think that's, makes him very appealing. AOC kind of has some of that same vibe about her. Graham Plattner, he looked, 2 months ago, he certainly had that vibe. He's gotten, beaten up pretty good in the last few weeks with some justification, but he had some of that, and I think that's why so much attention was focused on him, because everyone's looking for someone to lead the Democrats out of the wilderness and kind of electrify the base.
Yeah. So then, you talked about how the business model of a lot of these right wing media sources is outrage. And then because of that outrage, that gets clicks, that gets shares, that pushes them onto people's feeds who may have not heard of them before. And that's what sort of allows people who are not within the right wing media ecosystem to sort of get drawn in. I'm, do you think that that's sort of what the left should be doing? Like, should they be saying the most far left things that they can, trying to get clicks, trying to get shares, trying to pull those people in? Or do you think that that's something that worked for the right that won't really work for the left?
Yeah, if I was, going to sit down with the Democrats, but behind closed doors, I would say, aim for the center. That's where you want to be. That's what's going to win. That's what's going to win, the presidential election in 2028. You want to be there, but it's, but the challenge is, how do you aim for the center without having a boring, bland candidate in there?
Yeah.
That's what the Democrats are going to be facing.
Yeah. So do you think they should be going to the center on those social policies, on their economic policies, or across the board?
I mean, I think for me, I'm a centrist with a slight one foot slightly to the left, and my point of view has always been that the Democrats were a little bit too woke in the last few years, and I think that scared the population that's in the middle and pushed them to the right. And maybe it didn't come out in polls, but I think when they got to the voting booth, they hit the red button. And I think that that's where the Democrats need to be. They need to be in the middle. And certainly, if you look at the way elections run out, no matter whatever a politician's positions are, whether on the left or on the right, as they get closer to voting day, they start moving, more to the center because they want more votes. And and the way to get attention is to have a more extreme position.
Yeah. Do you think that pushing of people to the right, do you think like the reason people went to the right to such an extent in the last election cycle because the Republicans won the national popular vote, which is something they haven't really done since 2004? Do you think that's because the Democrats pushed more moderates, or do you think it's because that right-wing media ecosystem pulled people to the right?
I think it's because the Democrats didn't play it well. I think with some of their positions, they pushed people to the right. The Democrat. What I've been saying this for 2 or 3 years. The Democrats got positioned to be the party of transgender rights, and it's not like I'm not in favor of transgender rights or anything like that. But as a political position, I didn't think it helped them win, a wide swath of America. And, I always take this position, and this is just a very small example, but when, for a while, I haven't seen it this year, but I certainly saw it in the last 2 or 3 years that, there was a lot of, the right kept pointing out drag queen story hour and, we're mocking the Democrats for that. And I thought that was an untenable position for the Democrats to be in. And they shouldn't have to be forced to defend that. And they needed to move on from that. But that, the Democrats often fall into that trap. And I don't think that helps win them elections from time to time.
Yeah. I guess this sort of goes back to my previous point, which is like, do you think that right-wing ecosystem is useful for winning over swing voters, or do you think it's only really useful for energizing the base and firing up people who are already inclined to agree with the Republicans?
And it's what we have this year that'll be different from the past few years is the economy and gas prices. So that's this new factor in there. So the culture wars seem to be receding somewhat and not as big a factor. Here we are in the middle of 2026, and we'll just have to see where the road leads us later in the year. Certainly, at this point in time, it feels like it's the economy.
Yeah, because I know that a lot of those candidates who you previously talked about, Graham Plattner, Zohran Mamdani, a lot of these candidates are running on very progressive economic agendas, and they're sort of pushing hard on that economic message. And that seems to be doing well for Democrats in these key Senate and House races.
Yeah, I would agree.
I know there are also like a lot of different factions in conservative media and the Republican Party. Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes are more isolationist, more MAGA and less Trump, because I know they've been pretty critical of Donald Trump over the last couple of months in regards to the war in Iran and the fact that he hasn't been harsh enough on immigration. But then you also have the Fox News and Newsmax, who are more so Trump is always correct about everything and who are more loyal to Trump. And then you have Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, who are more traditional Republican and more just traditional, like pushing hawkish military policy, etc. Do you think that those different factions continue to coexist in the Republican Party, or do you think one of them is going to dominate the rest?
At this point, I couldn't say which one would dominate the rest. A lot depends on what the news environment will be and how things play out. Right now the biggest thing right now in right-wing media is the war in Iran. And, some factions are critical, some support it. And it's generating a lot of controversy and causing Trump a lot of headaches.
Do you think the factions that are prosecuting Trump over this war in Iran, do you think they are getting more viewership and are getting more sympathy, or do you think that it's the other way around where more Republicans are sympathetic to the war in Iran?
I haven't. It's a very good question. I haven't done any research or come across anything that suggests that it's good for attracting audiences to take that position. But it certainly, now that you raised it, it certainly makes me wonder. Like, when these outlets take a strong position, either pro or con on this, how does that affect their audience? Does it grow or does it shrink? But I do think that the tide is among the public. It's turning against Trump as far as the war. I mean, everything suggests that. And that doesn't necessarily translate into what will happen come the midterms, but it's certainly not in the plus category at this point. If I was Donald Trump,
I've heard a lot of buzz about, Tucker Carlson possibly running for president in 2028. Do you think his media, or at least his experience in media in Fox News, his Tucker Carlson hour, do you think that he'll have an advantage in that field in terms of being able to communicate because of his media experience and because of his existent platform in the Republican primary were he to run?
yeah, that would be a huge advantage. But it's also, Pete. Let's put it this way: Pete Hegseth is being talked about more than Tucker Carlson. And Pete Hegseth has the advantage of being already part of the Trump administration. And if the 2 months ago I might have said, like, oh boy, Hegseth could really come out of this war with in the pole position for 2028. But now, as the war drags on and maybe it's not going as well as he thought it was, he might be tarnished by that. Everyone looks good before they officially decide to run. That's all I can say on that.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Howard Polskin, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Adam.